That the reporting suggests that the people who are helping Elon through this Doge commission are like between the ages of 19 and 24. But then I guess my follow-up to that is, isn't it Trump's prerogative to hand out the security clearances? And so doesn't that also pose a risk? If Trump is going to completely defer to Elon, do whatever he wants him to do, and Elon is so haphazard that he's given high school graduates access to these highly sensitive databases, then really what's the bulwark to protect any of our sensitive material?
Yeah, so I mean, you're right about a couple of things. The first is that we've already seen reports, now not necessarily from Treasury, but from USAID, where there was apparently a physical altercation, where the head of security at USAID was like, no, you all are not coming into what's called a SCIF, which is a secure environment where highly classified information is kept. And there was an effort to keep out these folks because they didn't have security clearances and they did not have the proper security clearances to get in. And as I said, it was reported there was actually a physical altercation. And what was the result? They put the head of security on leave, right? Not that they kept things secure, but they put the head of security on leave. So this is a government-wide scandal happening here. And one can assume it's happening in other agencies like the Treasury Department as well. But against that backdrop, the president of the United States ultimately decides who gets access to classified information. He can also declassify information. You may remember there was some suggestion that he might have, which I think turned out to be bogus, that somehow the materials kept in his bathroom at Mar-a-Lago, he might have declassified prior to leaving the White House. Now, it appears that was not the case, but this is a system. This entire system of government, this entire system of classification, this entire system of databases rests on two premises which are currently failing us. The first is that the federal government, the executive branch, will not operate as the private fiefdom of the President of the United States and his cronies. Okay, and that he will not have a group of billionaire court jesters who, in exchange for humiliating themselves for his pleasure, will be given access and given perks and other special favors. The other, though, and we can't ever forget this, so I always hammer this point, is that it assumes that Congress is going to be a co-equal branch of government that is going to guard its prerogatives. And there are no prerogatives Congress historically guards more closely and gets its back up quicker about than the spending of money. Because Congress's big power is to tax and to spend. And when people in the executive branch try to overstep by either saying we're not going to spend the money you've told us to, or we're going to spend other money, usually Congress gets very, very aggressive. But what we have right now is Speaker Johnson has basically handed over his gavel and has crawled into the fetal position. John Thune, his picture should be on a milk carton. I don't even know where the Senate Majority Leader is these days. He seems to want nothing to do with this, even though, it is his constituents, it is the Republican constituents who are going to suffer, the same as constituents in blue states and in blue districts. But, we're just not seeing anything from them. And so it's been left to private organizations to bring litigation. And we're seeing that litigation every day.
Where do we stand right now, Mark, in terms of, because the message that we're getting from Elon and from Trump is that all of this stuff is happening, is that when they want to pause payments, for example, because they've taken over the payment processing system, that they've done it. Meanwhile, it is Congress who has sole ownership over where funds are allocated. And so there seems to be a conflict here. Even if those Republicans in Congress are willing to defer to Trump and Elon, that's all well and good. But where do we stand right now in terms of whether they've actually done the things that the executive branch is claiming that they've done?
Right. So look, I think the place where this is frankly being joined right now is in courtrooms, where DOJ lawyers are making fools out of themselves, making arguments and assertions that, for example, and you and I have talked about this, are then promptly undercut by the White House press secretary.
Right.
That they are saying things that are just not true, either because they don't know they're not true, or they think they're true, or what have you, or because the cases have been taken over by political operatives. But I think where this is ultimately going to be policed is in the courts. But in the meantime, Brian, I want to empathize with the people who are writing in because, we've talked before about the weaponization of government. And usually what we're saying is, look, Kash Patel and Pam Bondi are going to come in and they will open political investigations of Donald Trump's enemies. They will use the power of the state to pursue retribution. We've talked about IRS audits against political enemies, but this is good. This is a good example of how the federal government can instill fear in everyday Americans. People who rely on their Social Security checks, people who don't want their information disclosed to rogue actors or to third parties or to not kept in secure ways by the federal government. At its most extreme, we saw what happens if they cut off payments to Medicaid and what it will mean for the poor. But what if they decide to cut off payments to Social Security recipients? What if they do it on a targeted basis? What if they do it in just blue areas? Or what if they do it, Brian, by looking up your Social Security number or my Social Security number? And, thankfully, we don't rely on those programs, but many people do, and they have those worries. And I wish I could stand here and say, don't worry, because the federal government wouldn't do that to its citizens. The President of the United States wouldn't do that to his citizens. That he would never allow a rogue actor. He would never allow an oligarch. He would never allow people who don't have the best interests of the American people to access this information. And I wish I could tell you that's true, but I can't tell you that's true because democracy is dying in darkness. Democracy is dying in the darkness of these federal agencies that have been taken out over. Members of Congress, tried to gain access just earlier today to USAID, and they were blocked. What is it that whether it's Doge or Musk's people or Trump's people or whoever, what are they hiding? What are they hiding from members of Congress who should have oversight responsibility? To be clear, they were Democratic members of Congress who were blocked. Why is the head of security at an agency being blocked? Why are federal prosecutors being discharged? Why are FBI agents having to be asked to fill out questionnaires about whether they are loyal to the government or they are loyal to Donald Trump? This is all a very terrifying time. And all I can say is there are lawyers out there who are going to fight in court for you and hopefully win. And there are news outlets like the work you do, like the work that Democracy Docket does to try to keep people apprised. But, now is a time for worry and for courage.
Mark, we have these conversations, and I think they're especially important to give everybody watching a better understanding of what's going on. Ultimately, at the end of the day, as much as I would love for you to be able to have some type of tangible impact in a situation like this, it's really going to be left up to the folks who are in charge, whether it's Congress or in Senate. Even from the minority, those are really going to be the ultimate bulwarks against any of this. And so, what is your message to, or what would you recommend that our Democratic senators and Democratic lawmakers do in an instance like this, where we really do seem to be in the midst of some type of hostile government takeover by Trump and Elon Musk?
Yeah, look, I think, Brian Schatz, senator from Hawaii, announced today he's putting a hold on all the nominees, either in the State Department or in USAID, as a result of what's going on there. You saw a number of members of the Senate and House, Democrats, publicly, like I said, try to get into that office today, including Congressman Raskin, who I know I've had on my podcast for Democracy Doc, and I know you've done a series with. Chris Van Hollen, a senator from Maryland, and Don Beyer, a congressman rather, from Virginia, and others. And I think you are starting to see more and more Democrats speak out against this. But we need to keep in mind that Democrats are in the minority. Democrats do not control the gavels in either the House or the Senate. And we cannot give Republicans the free pass. We cannot assume that Republicans don't have to act responsibly because they are beholden to Donald Trump. We cannot assume that they should be compromising the interests of their constituents because they want to bow down and show fealty to Trump. And we usually say that it is the job of the media, the so-called fourth estate. The legacy media claims a lot of constitutional prerogatives. They claim that they get to have sources that they don't have to reveal. They should have special access at protests and not get arrested. They should have, privileges in the White House to ask questions